Whenever you think about writing anything, whether it's a memo or a report or a policy analysis, the first thing that you want to think about is who is your audience. In the case of policy analyses, these are long, dense papers, but the majority of people who read them don't have time to read them very thoroughly. So they're going to go through them very quickly the first time. They're going to skim them for the specific information they want. And they want to be able to find that information very easily. Then, once they've found the information they want, they're going to want to trust that the supporting details will be there that make the case for the policy analysis as it goes forward. So when we talk about writing in policy analysis, we're really talking about ways that we organize information in writing so that they will be clear to people. Because of that, I want to think about it in terms of paragraphing. How does one organize thoughts into coherent paragraphs so that people can easily select out the key ideas? In this kind of approach, we want to think of a paragraph as not so much as just a clump of sentences hung together around a topic, but we want to think of it as serving a series of functions. And the primary function is the expression of an idea in a key sentence. The second thing that a good paragraph should have in a policy analysis is some development of that key sentence. The third feature is evidence drawn from data of some sort. The fourth is explanation or illustration or example explaining the data. And finally, a transition moving us from the key idea of this paragraph to the next. And I'll take each of these separately. So the most important notion is the key sentence. A key sentence is a propositional statement that expresses the central claim of a paragraph. The rest of the sentences in the paragraph elaborate and support this claim. The central point of a well-written paragraph should be immediately apparent to the reader. There should be no confusion between the central idea of the paragraph and the elaboration in support of that idea. If you were to take a paragraph from a piece of technical writing like a policy analysis and to carve the paragraph down to its essential content, that is to what the paragraph is basically trying to say, you should end up with the key sentence. All the other sentences are there to help that central sentence deliver its message in the most persuasive way. So, So a key sentence is a propositional statement expressing one of your key points, and it can be, but it's not necessarily the very first sentence. The placement of key sentences can differ depending on the kind of style that you have. I went to a conference once that was about the writing of key sentences, believe it or not, and there was a scholar there from the University of Washington who had spent her life studying how academics write papers, which strikes me as like one of the most boring professional things you could possibly ever do. But nonetheless, that is what she did, and she had some interesting data to show that in the natural sciences, the key sentence is almost always the first sentence in any given paragraph. That in many social science papers, the key sentence usually occurs as the second sentence, or sometimes the third sentence. But in many humanities papers, the key sentence doesn't occur until the middle of the paragraph, or even in the last third of the paragraph, and the rest of it is sort of, build-up. So the placement of the key sentence isn't essential as long as it comes across clearly. Let's take, for example, the sentence that the paragraph that I started out with, that I spoke to you a few minutes ago. So here it is, cleaned up and turned into a paragraph. And as you can see, the key sentence in this is the first sentence. the words, "the key sentence expresses the central claim of a paragraph," is what the whole paragraph is about. The rest of the sentence elaborates on that statement. Now, here's another paragraph. Under these circumstances, the Soviet occupation continued. As the government tried to suppress opposition to its rules, severe human rights abuses occurred. Despite international humanitarian laws that prohibited civilian attacks during conflict, all parties involved in the civil and ethnic wars in Afghanistan specifically targeted civilians. Actors in peaceful demonstrations were punished, students and teachers were arrested if they participated, and political prisoners were tortured as a result of their participation. So what we have here is a paragraph in which the second sentence is the key sentence. The first paragraph is a transition from the previous sentence. From the previous paragraph. So my point is that every good paragraph has to have a key sentence. The key sentence should be clear to anyone who reads the paragraph, but the placement doesn't always have to be at the beginning. And in fact, if it is always at the beginning, your writing might get a little tedious or boring. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We want to sacrifice style for clarity every time when we're doing policy analysis. But sometimes you can have both. Okay, once you've written down your key sentence, you need to elaborate on it or contextualize it. No matter how clearly you express your key sentence, it needs additional support and additional context. This elaboration explains the relation of the key point to the argument as a whole and includes any relevant context needed for understanding the point. Finally, the development of the key sentence can follow the key sentence, but it can also precede it. So in some of the paragraphs where the key sentence is the third or fourth or fifth sentence, it's because the elaboration and context are put up front, and then the key sentence is stated, often followed by some explanation or some examples. Once you've made your key point and you've elaborated it so that people can't misunderstand it, it's time to support it by evidence. There are many different types of evidence that go into good paragraphs in policy analysis papers. You might have quotations from an authoritative source, which will be clearly cited in your footnotes and in your references in the back. It might be examples from evidence. So it's possible that you have conducted telephone interviews, that you have done some independent research, you have some primary documents. Finally, it could be that the evidence doesn't actually occur in the paragraph itself, rather it occurs in a chart or a table where you have graphically represented the data that supports your key sentence. And you'll merely refer to this in the paragraph by saying, see figure 1 or something like that. And so forth. There's many different ways of putting evidence into the paragraph. Now, one of the things that people most get wrong when they are writing complex paragraphs for analytical papers is the fact that data does not speak for itself. In general, when we put forward our evidence, we think that people will easily follow our argument and see how the evidence relates to the argument. In fact, this is not the case. You need to explain exactly how your example proves or supports the point that you made in your key sentence. Sometimes there will be, you'll explain how the evidence supports your key sentence, and you will recognize as you're doing so that this evidence could be understood in different ways. So what you want to do there is you want to state out the counterarguments. That is, the best way to defeat an alternate interpretation is not to ignore it, but to bring it out in your writing and say, although this could be interpreted in this way, we interpret it this other way, and here's the reason why our way of interpreting it is better. That is what we call a counterargument. Finally, every paragraph needs to have a transition that moves you from one key sentence from one paragraph to the next paragraph by tying the previous key sentence to the next key sentence. And this can be done in a number of different ways. The transition sentence can occur as the last sentence of the preceding paragraph, for example. Or it may occur as the first sentence of the next paragraph. In the example above about Afghanistan, that's exactly what it did. It said it had a transition sentence and then it had the key sentence. But you can also do transitions in other ways. You can use things like subheads or the placement of paragraphs juxtaposing to each other as transitional units. And so there's a number of ways that you can make your point that you move from one idea to another. The transition is important because it leads the reader from one paragraph to another, from the introduction to the body of the argument, and as we'll see when we do presentations and you do your briefings, one of the things students miss is that often it's the transition from one slide to another where the most important content takes place. So I was talking about types of transitions. We have a methodological style of transition, where you say, in the first section of this paper I will describe X, in the next part of the paper I will describe Y, in the following part of the paper I will describe Z, etc. Another way of doing transitions is by using subheadings, as I said. Subheadings can cue the reader as to the move that you're making from the introduction to the body of the argument, or from one section of the argument to another section of the argument. And finally, you can use conjunctions. And yet, but this is not always the case, and there is another reason to suppose, all of these kinds of things, these ands, buts, and ors, these conjunctions, move you from one idea to another. Before we conclude, in conclusion, I want to say something about conclusions. When you are writing an analytical paper, it's going to have many different sections and subsections. Every section should have an introduction that summarizes the point of the whole section and ties that section to the argument as a whole. You should then go into these multiple paragraphs, and then when you get done, you should have a conclusion. This conclusion should occur in every section and subsection. Okay, that is, it's not something that should only happen when you have a. It's not something that should only happen at the end of the paper as a whole. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a concluding paragraph that's going to have a different set of functions from a regular paragraph. A concluding paragraph is going to summarize the argument that you've been making. It's going to link the paper to the larger inquiry, the problem or key question that you are elaborating in the paper. By summarizing, I mean that you're going to restate all the key points. Ideally, the best way to summarize is to simply go back through a section of your paper and string all the key points together and re-express them in new words. So you're going to restate the key points in sequence, in new words, and then you are going to have a second part of the conclusion that's going to link the paper, it should be link the section to the larger question of the paper as a whole. This revisits the problem that's discussed in the section and discusses its contribution to the whole analysis, and then transitions you on to the next section of the paper. Okay, what I'd like you to do is to download the worksheet that asks you about questions about this part, and we're going to begin our next meeting going over these questions. So, have a good week, and I will see you next class.